Well, hello again, folks, and I'm hoping you can help me out here today because I'm a bit confused, a lot confused, and maybe there's a good reason for it. I've been noticing. So the reason I wanted to bring this up is because I find that if I'm confused, I have a hard time being effective, and affective in my actions. So if you can help me to think straighter here, maybe I can be, maybe we can all, whatever somebody shares, maybe we can all be more effective. Years ago, I was talking to somebody who I respect greatly, who's actually quite religious. So she sees things, she sees the world through the veil of religiosity, which, though I may disagree with the minutiae and the details, that veil in which she sees the world ends up getting a lot of things right, I find, over time as I look back. And one of the things that she said to me one time, because we were talking about evil, and she said, Steve, from what I can see, evil doesn't make any sense. So to try to figure it out, it's an endless spiral. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I kept that with me for quite some time. Though at times, I think in times of confusion, I think the religious people would say, let's turn it over to God. And the philosopher might say, okay, let's make some rationality out of this. So the philosopher in me is working now to try to figure out, and I think that maybe I kind of have, and to some extent, why it is that some things seem to be a corollary. When I see the world today, I see a whole lot of messed up people. And I look back at times when there was more order in the world, and I realized that there was certain things that were different. For example, in the family that I grew up in, I had what many people would call a patriarchal father figure in the house. In fact, his mentality, I would say, was largely from the 1800s. I mean, his dad was born in about 1880, I think, and my dad was born in just after the First World War, 1919 or 1918, I'm not sure which, one of the two. But he idolized his father, and he in so many ways, his mentality was that of his father's, which came out of really Edwardian times, if you think about it. It's quite amazing. And he believed very strongly in a patriarchy. He believed very strongly in a hierarchy. And he believed very strongly in what Jesse Lee Peterson talks about, although he didn't know Jesse Lee Peterson, but he had a very similar sort of order to his life, which is along the lines of what Jesse Lee Peterson talks about, God and Christ, Christ and man, man over woman, and women over children. And for the longest time, I thought that was a bunch of old-fashioned claptrap, men and women are equal, blah, 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 and all this sort of thing. And I still believe that in terms of, if you're going to have a legal system, then everybody deserves the protection of that law in equality. In other words, if the legal system says that we shall not abuse people in certain ways, well, just because of somebody's age or gender or color or creed or whatever, we don't get to abuse them just because of that. In other words, there is that form of equality, but that form of equality is manufactured by man, because we manufacture the legal system and we come up with these constructs, right? But are men and women the same? I mean, in so many ways we see differences. So I've often thought this equality thing is a man-made thing. It's a manufactured by human beings, right? Because if it's true that men and women on average are different, if we're different, how can we possibly be equal? It doesn't make any sense to me. So what I've seen over the years is this push to equalize men and women in so many ways. And that, in so many ways, has been affected, right? Especially in the legal system and largely culturally. Although deep down, I don't think people believe it. And what I see now is that all this chaos going on in the world, like I was listening to this podcast the other day about Seattle, and the place is in complete turmoil. There's a bunch of rabid, basically terrorists, occupying a certain area and claiming it's their own country and all sorts of stuff, and high levels of rapes and theft and just complete disorder, garbage everywhere. I watched a documentary about Seattle. The place is an absolute pigsty from what I can see. And I found out later that the police chief, the mayor, and the governor of the state are all women. I mean, it wasn't that long ago when women were rarely in positions of power. In fact, it wasn't that long ago. This is a little anecdote here, and I think I've talked about this before. It's about 20 years ago, I'm going to say, about 20 years ago, a few brothers of mine and myself, we were out on a hike on an island near Vancouver, actually. We were on a trail, and we ran across these two young ladies. And of course, we were pretty young, so we took interest and so on, and we started talking. They happened to be from Switzerland. They were backpackers from Switzerland. We ended up chatting for quite a while, and they happened to mention, we were asking about Switzerland, how's Switzerland, this and that, because I heard about direct democracy in Switzerland and what have you, and their referendums for everything. And I happened to ask them about elections, and they happened to mention that, Switzerland just recently had a general election for their president or whatever, their Congress, whatever it is that they've got there. And I was interested in that, and I said, well, because I'd heard that Swiss people, no matter where they live in the world, they vote in their election. So if they happen to be living abroad, they still vote in their election. So I just assumed that they voted. And I said, well, did you girls vote? And they looked at me kind of odd. They furrowed their brow, but they said, well, no, women don't vote in Switzerland. And that was kind of odd. I mean, that was, at that time, I was very much of an egalitarian. I believed in women's rights and feminism and all this sort of thing, and that everybody was equal, and it's all just basically, I had fooled myself that somehow gender is just a social construct and whatever, at least socially, right? And only later, when I began to find out that when women get the franchise, that the country is socialist in 25 years. This has been proven over and over again in different studies. And yet I looked at Switzerland, and I'd been to Switzerland, and Switzerland was extremely orderly, very, very patriarchal. It was the only country I'd been to in Europe where the police pulled me over and interrogated me as to where I was from. I mean, they actually protected their borders. They still had a border at the time, and they wanted to see my papers and so on, and they were snooping around at anybody who didn't belong there. It's a very manly thing to do, right? So, and it was extremely safe. I mean, everybody had a gun. Everybody had like an assault rifle in their house and all this. Very manly things, because men still ran the place. I didn't realize that, but they still did. And even to this day, once again, that was about 20 years ago. I think they've switched since to women voting, but it's still within that 25-year framework, right? And, Switzerland, a very, very small geographic region of Europe, yet it has its own currency, its own borders. I was there actually back in September. We went to Switzerland. And even then, they still had their own currency. They still had a border. We had to go through a border checkpoint. It was the only checkpoint we had to go through in Europe. It was pretty lackadaisical, mind you, but we still had to go through it. And didn't have to go through any checkpoint leaving Switzerland, though, because that, when we left Switzerland into France, that country had, coincidentally, whether there's a correlation here or not, whether there's any causation, that country of France women have had the franchise for a very long time. So I'm just wondering. I'm wondering if there's a correlation here, if we can learn something from this, and what you think about it. It's not to belittle, women at all. And in fact, this same person that I talked about the religiosity, about the evil and so on, she was talking about how, because I knew of her family structure for sure, and she said that when she grew up, she always felt less than boys. And I asked her, I said, well, why did you feel that? I mean, because sure, her father was very clear that men had a certain role and women had a certain role. So that's what I suggested to her. I said, well, it was because her father presented, that was what she got from her father. And my point was, well, was that really his point, or was that somehow you reacting to what you were taught in school by feminists, that men shouldn't be this and men shouldn't be that? Because I knew this guy, and he always believed that women had roles and men had roles. It wasn't like one was less than the other. It's just that we're different, and we have different roles within society. That was his approach to it. So, it's and the reason I brought up the evil initially is because evil sometimes, I think, is basically about confusion. It's about things that are irrational. And though I don't see it directly as evil that women are voting and women are was a woman mayor here, or a woman this or a woman that, it's just that when we're told that this is the way it is, that men and women are equal, and any questioning of it whatsoever is bigoted, as in the father of this woman, that he was somehow a bigot, I don't buy it. Because, and that's the sort of the starting point of evil, right? This false religion that you must believe what is false, what there's no evidence for. So for me, I've said it for years and years and years and years now. I'm no stranger to this, that I believe in a world where there is inequality. And the reason I believe that is because I believe in a world where we are different, right? And if we're different, how in the heck can we be equal? It makes no sense, right? It's like saying that person is tall and that person is short, but we're going to pretend that their height is equal. No, it's not equal. It's not equal. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other. A is not equal to B. They're both letters, but they're not the same. But how can we say that one is better than the other? No, they perform different functions in the alphabet, but they're both necessary. So this notion that so that's sort of the source of an example of evil in a way, and how it sneaks into our culture is we begin to deny reality. We begin to denigrate reality. We begin to ignore reality, and therefore we end up with chaos. And I think there's something to be said for the old adage or the old concepts that there's generally in an organization, in a cultural organization, there's generally a structure, a hierarchy of structure. And if for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, men have held a certain position in that structure, and women have held a certain position in that structure, and then we decide, because we don't like it for some reason, we think it's bigoted or something, we just flip it upside down and put all the women in charge where men used to be, I think you're going to have blowback. And I think that's what we're seeing. So correct me if I'm wrong on this. I know this is supposed to be the Inner Genie project, where we learn how to be more effective in our actions. But I think this is fundamental to this, because if we are confused in some way, we don't understand what's going on, we can get worried about the world and so on. But when we see logic in the world, and we realize that righteousness and truth can be sort of discerned through the fog of all this illogic that we're throwing at us, that we have to sort of comply with the church of woke, that somehow women are equal to men and men are equal to women. I don't see any evidence of that on a general scale. Yes, it is true that some women are taller than most men. That is true. But the average is that they're shorter, right? And yes, it is true that, women tend to be more emotional than men. But at the same time, some men are more emotional than some women. True. It's all true. But I'm talking about on average, right? On average, human beings have developed their societies and so on based on those averages. And I don't think it's been average throughout history, that evidence that we can see, that women are running all the institutions, which in the case of Seattle, we see absolute complete chaos, and all of the senior people are women. Is there a relationship here? I don't know. I tend to think there is. What it is, I'm not sure, but I think it's that we've flipped things upside down and upset the apple cart, basically, of society that used to have some sort of semblance of order and now doesn't seem to have it anymore. What do you think? Steve, you're doing great chatting. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, and share, and we hopefully will talk again soon. Bye for now.